Design Girl writes, how do you choose pattern papers for the background of your pages? I used to be a solid cardstock person, and after watching more videos, I'm trying to use more pattern papers, but I'm struggling. I've mastered using a subtle grid or ledger, but how do you go beyond that? I notice my paper is either too busy or too dark. What should I look for to spot a good background paper? Glitter Girl, can you help Design Girl pick presentable patterns?
Of course I can. Now, in the first part of this adventure, we looked at bold patterns and a design that uses a 50-50 concept where you have two pattern papers that are each taking up half the space, plus a pattern paper that goes all the way around the edge, and there's a neutral to divide the two different sets of patterns. Now, one thing that I think is really important that we didn't go into a lot of detail with in this particular adventure is that the reason I told you to stay away from choosing the colors directly from the photos is because sometimes when you start to ignore the colors in the photos and go straight to the paper, you'll make choices that actually help tell your story. So the pattern paper isn't just there because it's pretty, it's not just there because you've had to find some perfectly matched thing where if I'm using these photos with trees in the background, the pattern paper has to have trees, not at all like that. But that by putting the colors of the photo aside, and looking for pattern papers that help me tell the story, I was able to better capture the moment than just what you see in the pictures. So, for example, this day looks quite hazy and it doesn't in any way capture all the energy of that day. It was actually this photos taken aside from a really big party going on, and there's a lot of activity and there's a lot of energy, and that's why I wanted to use really bold, colorful prints. There was also a lot of sunshine, even though for whatever reason this particular photo, the day looks quite hazy, it wasn't. So that's why I wanted to use this bright yellow, kind of sunny themed embellishment and pattern paper, because that way you're helping to tell the story by picking up little bits and pieces. Now, my journaling doesn't go through and say the reason I chose this pattern paper is because there are lots of colors here and that gives you energy and it was an energetic day. I don't ever go into that much detail about it, and the truth is that it may be when other people look at my albums, they won't have any clue why I've chosen brightly colored pattern papers for these particular photos. But when I tell the story, my perspective is what is part of my creative process. I remember the day being colorful and energetic, and therefore I'm going to scrapbook it with colorful, energetic patterns. I hope that helps a little bit with explaining why I'm so adamant about getting away from the idea that the only way to choose colors is to take the colors from your photos. Okay, so I know that last time we worked on a 50-50 strategy. This time I want to work on something that is 1/3 to 2/3, and I want to show you how that works with a few different pattern papers, and then we'll get on to one layout for today. So today I've pulled up 6 different pattern papers that all illustrate the same thing, but they're from different manufacturers, different collections. So showing these, you're seeing all the bold sides. Now that might not necessarily mean that there's a lot of color, but sometimes that's true. So you'll see several multicolored prints here where there's a lot of color involved, and that's what makes the pattern very bold because there's so much color. But there's also the idea that the boldness can come from the design rather than the color. So this just has neutral colors, but the design itself is very large. It takes up so much space. It kind of looks like it won't fit into the 12 by 12 space. So the design is very bold. Sometimes it also comes from a limited use of colors, but something that is very high contrast and striking, what we call a more graphic design, which is a little bit of a confusing term because clearly all of this involves graphic design. That's a nice umbrella term for everything that goes into making a pattern paper. But if I can use the word in 2 different ways, this sort of style is something that we think of as graphic illustration, where there's not a lot of small detail. It's taken down to just that black on white type image, and you're not looking at pencil sketches or anything like that. We're looking at something that's a little more linear. So here, because the color is all in the background, that aqua, and then we have black and off-white in the colors that are on top, there's this high contrast from all that black on aqua. The patterns themselves are quite small, and the pattern repeats over the page, so it could be labeled as a small repeating pattern. But I think the high contrast here and the detail of the cameras is in a way that actually grabs your attention and would make your eye go toward those cameras if you were given this plus a lot of other patterns that weren't quite so bold. So I still would put this in the bold pattern category. So all of these pattern papers have a bold side here. But as I turn over each one has a coordinating B side that's far more subtle. So this one from Crate Papers, the Pier, has these lovely, they look like the top of beach umbrellas, but it has a really pale wood grain on the other side. This bold stripe from Dear Lizzie Lucky Charm has just cream with small repeating pink triangles. That big black and cream doily print from My Mind's Eye, The Sweetest Thing, has a cream tone-on-tone chevron. These bright Fancy Pants arrows has a pink tone-on-tone chevron. This blue, red, and pink floral from Adrian Lumen for Webster's Pages has a pink kind of trellis print, very small repeating pattern with not any additional color, just the pink and white. And those Fancy Pants cameras from Memories Captured have a bold black and white stripe. Admittedly, that's still a bold pattern, but it's more neutral than all this pattern. There's not any additional color. There's nothing complicated about the pattern, and you can see what it is in a really small look. So all of these have this really subtle pattern, well, not really subtle, but a more subtle pattern on the reverse. And in each case, the reverse will coordinate with the pattern that's bolder on the other side. So these kind of combinations can be a great way to start mixing your pattern papers with a little bit more confidence, because it doesn't happen on every single paper, but it happens consistently throughout a lot of collections. It also means that you can get a lot more from your stash if you're looking at both sides and not dismissing a pattern that you maybe thought looked great online and then you got it in person and thought, oh my goodness, there's so much color here, I can never cope with it. But if you imagine doing this and seeing both patterns, you can suddenly see what that would look like on a smaller scale, and it might be a lot more useful. So today I am going to go ahead and start with this beach umbrella print, but the same design could work with any of these patterns, and that's what your challenge is going to be this week, is to find a paper in your stash where it has a nice bold print on one side and a more subtle print on the other side, and you're going to be using them together. So I'll go ahead and pull out my other supplies, and I'll walk you through this new layout. Here's my bold pattern that I'm starting with, and I'm going to be putting this on a background of dark brown cardstock, but you could choose any of the colors that are in your pattern. It doesn't have to be a neutral. If your personal style tends to involve highlighting the color more, you can bring the color into the edge with a pink cardstock, a blue cardstock, and so forth. But I've just taken the whole piece and trimmed it down a little bit so that I can see that I'll have that 1/4-inch frame around the edge. And then I've divided it into 1/3 and 2/3. So just shy of 4 inches, just shy of 8 inches since I've taken that little bit off the edge. And this is the same thing that we did in the border episode recently, and it's the same pattern, but then when I flip one piece over to the other side, I'm going to have this coordinated background where I have a more subtle pattern over here and a more bold pattern in the smaller amount. So this way I can still introduce that bold pattern without it bringing in so much that I feel like everything is overwhelmed from the start. I'm going to go ahead and add these here. Then I'm going to bring in more pattern here by choosing different patterns that will work with these papers that aren't necessarily from the same collection. So take you through my process of how I chose the different patterns to use. And I actually stuck with 6x6 patterns for this particular page just because I thought it would be handy to have some smaller patterns and just easier to work with smaller patterns if I know I'm just going to be working on this section of the page where the join between the two papers falls. But of course you could totally use 12 by 12s, there's no problem there. So I have this selection, and I probably won't use all of them, but each one was chosen for a different reason. I have 3 photos that are going on this page. This one of the hot air balloons, one of a tree in the sky, and then one of the skyline. So from here, what I wanted to do was choose some papers that come straight from the photos, some that come from the more bold pattern paper, and some that come from the more neutral. That gives me a little bit of a palette to work with, and here's how I did that. I don't want something that's going to be exactly the same. None of these are from the same collection. This is from the Pier. These are all from different things. So I started with this one. This is a My Mind's Eye My Mind's Eye pattern paper from Collectible, and very different pattern here in a floral, but the colors are really similar here. So I've got that brown to anchor pinks, reds, teals, and a bit of yellow. So all the same colors in a different pattern. So a nice delicate floral, but still quite a bold pattern. Also have the same colors represented here in this polka dot from Simple Story Snap. Same sort of colors, same dark brown to ground everything, and that's why because I have these 2 brown patterns, I went with that brown around the edge. And this one is a cleaner print. It has a little bit of white rather than cream, but I don't think it's too much to be a problem. And other than that, it's the same colors, but this pattern, although it's still quite colorful, is a lot subtler than the beach umbrellas and the floral. Then I chose some single color patterns that picked up different colors in this beach umbrella pattern paper. So I have some navy blue, some turquoise, and some pink. And those are, 2 of them are from Maggie Holmes, and one of them is from My Mind's Eye Collectible. Then I picked up another wood grain that's a whitewashed wood grain. It's different than what's here, but still another wood grain print on a smaller scale. I would probably, if I use this, it'll be in a small amount so that I can bring something from the wood grain 2/3 over to this 1/3. So a small piece over here maybe goes into the final design. And then something that would fit with all the photos, and that was a nice blue sky pattern paper. So those are both from the Crepe Paper 6x6 pad. So I have all those different patterns to work with. They each have a different reason, but none of them were me going to the photos and thinking I must find a red pattern paper and a green pattern paper and a gold pattern paper because that's what's in the picture. Because I'd rather work with the whole thing here. So I know that these colors here represent an attitude and a mindset and a feeling of all these pictures and the story I want to tell about this neighborhood and all of the things that you see there. So I start with that pattern paper. I add in a neutral because that's going to help build the story as well, and also make it a little softer on the eye. And from there, that means I can take some additional patterns from this, some additional patterns from this, and some patterns from the photos. That's why I have so many patterns when I start working. Just because I'm using that same 1/3, 2/3 setup in the background that I did in the borders episode doesn't mean that I have to do the same sort of design on top of that, of course. So this time, instead of focusing on borders, I'm starting with frames as my jumping off point for the design. I have 2 different kinds of frames. They're both from Crepe Paper. This one is fabric, and then I have some that are chipboard as well. And I thought I would use some of them for photos and then some of them to contain additional pieces of pattern paper. So I have those 3 that will go on the photos, and these 2 I can fill with patterns from the different papers that I've selected so far. I think that patterns are a great way to, the frames are a great way to have that neutral divide, just like we had the gray pattern paper dividing the 2 different patterns last week and having a bit of a barrier. You can do the same thing where if you want to use 2 different bold pattern papers, you can use them with a frame inside, and it works just like a mat, except you're going to put it over the top, and in this case it's going to have a nice texture. So I'm going to start with that other really bold busy pattern paper, and I'm going to place it in this frame. Then I'm going to choose another pattern to go in the smaller frame, and in this case I want to use that other wood grain because I think that the the wood grain is the one that's not going to look right just kind of laid on top of the other wood grain. It needs something to divide it, and if I separate it into that nice little box, that's going to work a lot better. So I'll go ahead and cut all of those down to fit and get everything attached to the back of the frame. When I'm working with frames, I tend to adhere the photo to the frame first so that I can move things around and see what they'll look like with the frame intact. It just makes things a little bit simpler to build the rest of the page. Adding things with frames means I can decide, do I want everything to line up against each other or do I want it to overlap? So for example, I could place everything so that it's nice and square against the different frames and just move things around in nice neat little boxes like this. So you could have a design like this that's quite clean, where there's still a lot going on, but everything is just equal spaced. So everything is touching but not overlapping. Then you also have the option of giving everything a little bit more breathing room. So you could separate it all out and have the same margin space between all those different elements. Or you can overlap things a bit. So what I'm thinking is that I would like to bring this down a little bit so that this photo, since it's the largest and most colorful, is the most prominent. I want it to be the highest on the page here. And then I also really want this photo to be noticed. So I'm thinking the way to give it a little bit more weight would be to pick it up and give it dimension up off the top of the page. So I'd like to overlap that. It does mean that I'll need to adhere with some dimension underneath to make that all work, but that's easy enough to do. And at this point, I don't think that I want this one to overlap. I'd rather have that one go ahead and be flat. But because I have this one large piece overlapping at the bottom, I know that I'm going to need in the rest of my design to have some things that overlap. Otherwise, that particular frame is going to look really out of place. Now, I want to look at what other little boxes I can start adding. So I have some pieces that I've cut out of 6x6 pattern papers. These are from Simple Story Snap. And they're little embellishment or well, they're not really journaling cards. Don't have a lot of room for journaling, but little card-shaped things where it's all in nice rectangles and squares. And I could add it straight to the page here, but I think that this is going to get lost a little bit where everything now that I've included so far has that big, bold frame. So I want to go ahead and do some matting, and I chose this pattern paper that's blue because it's the same sort of pattern that's in that frame. And just using a little bit of matting like this is going to help it not seem so out of place, but at the same time not make it so heavy like I'm completely filling the page with frames. So I think I will look at different cards that I can add a little paper frame like that. And the other thing is that some of these can be made smaller to layer inside these squares. So right now, if I place that there, then you wouldn't see the wood grain pattern paper at all. But if I cut it down to just the little Polaroid frame, it would fit right inside. By repeating that idea of a die cut piece with a paper mat, I could add a few more pieces around the edge that would then give me more overlapping, so this overlapping frame doesn't look quite so out of place. So I have the Simple Stories card down here, this die cut Jenny Bolin card, and this one is from Glitz, and it's really pale cloud print. Now, each of those then has a paper mat that's one of the patterns that I chose at the beginning, and I don't need to use them anywhere else on the page. They're just a little bit of single colored pattern to divide the different patterns of the background from that particular die cut element and give it that similar treatment of a frame but on a smaller scale. Now I do want to deal straight away with this little Polaroid. I've put it inside here, but this particular caption isn't what I want to go with this particular layout and the story I want to tell. So I'm going to add a little embellishment on top of that. Just a little flare badge. This is a Jenny Bolin flat back, and they are flat on the back, which is quite nice. Don't need to use anything special. You can use normal adhesive, and that should fit right inside that little box. So sometimes using frames works really well to just look at okay, I have this space, and then make it a smaller space with something that fits inside that, then look at that particular piece. So I have this red box, what do I have that will fit inside that space? And you're just constantly working within the frame to get something smaller. So I have now some space allocated on the page, so that I need to go ahead and get my title in this nice horizontal space before I go any further. And it would be nice to get my journaling on the page. I'm going to put that in this space here. So all of this framed element is going to be framed again by wording. So I'll have handwriting up here and my title, and I think to bring it in and echo that idea of a frame, I'll add a handwritten bit underneath the title so I could put the date or the location down there, and that way it kind of uses that same idea of starting with a frame, and then a frame doesn't necessarily have to go all the way around. You can still use the concept of framing to go maybe top and bottom or side to side. So that's why I'm going to use my handwriting as that design element to bring it all together there. Here's my journaling and my title. Now I think that you could use this space in a little bit of a different way if you wanted it to be a bit more bold. I'm finding that looking at this title, it's a little bit more delicate compared to the pages that I normally create, and that's because I've used all small flat letter stickers, and perhaps using some larger thickers along here and extending so that the wording "This is home" took up that full width might make it seem a little bit more in fitting the style that continues throughout my albums. But in this case, I'm not going to stop and change it. I'm happy with how it is, but I'm aware that it's a little bit of a different look. To remedy that, when I am then creating a few more pages within this album, I'll do a little bit more with that particular turquoise alphabet so that it doesn't seem such a sudden jump when I get to this particular page and think, where are the thickers? I do find it difficult to make pages without thickers, but I wanted to give that turquoise alphabet a try on its own. I love it as a subtitle alphabet. I'm wondering if perhaps it's just a little bit too lightweight for a title when everything here is so big. But I've made that choice so that you can decide without having to make to take that and make it a mistake or anything like that. If you find that it's just right for you, then you know you're fine with smaller flat letter stickers. If you're wishing that it was bigger and bolder, then go ahead and go for bolder, thicker alphas right from the beginning. Another thing to have a look at and decide when you're making your page is whether you think that this writing is too busy on the pattern paper and you would prefer it on something simpler. Because I don't have a problem reading it on the wood grain as it is, and I quite like that look, but I don't think that it works for everyone. If you prefer your writing to be really, really legible, then take another 4x6 card, place it behind here, and you'll have a block here with a pattern that is easy to write on, or where you've printed the writing on something very plain. Just tucking that another layer here would be absolutely fine. It won't destroy the look of the design in any way, and then you'll have that choice of having the writing on the less busy background instead. And of course, with that one, you can go ahead and try both, because if you get it onto the background and you don't like it, just cut your paper slightly larger than what you've written, and you'll be able to put it on top, and no one will know that you tried the first time to write it straight on the background. Now, I want to finish this with just a few little embellishments, so I'm going to identify the spaces where I think there should be a little bit of something to dress it up. I'm going to go in this space here, and I want to bring in something here that's not quite so square, because I'm aware that I have a lot of squareness going on here. I really like how this circle changes that up, so I'm going to look for a circular element that I could add here. I think instead of having it as a full circle, maybe I'll have something that I can tuck underneath here and just have kind of a semicircle at the top. I'd like a little bit of a small embellishment under here to kind of join this title with the subtitle. And then maybe just some really small sparkles, and I'm thinking I'll use some of the gold sequins from the Jenny Bolin Gold sequin pack and just dart them about so that I have these different areas aren't completely neglected. I just want a little something. I don't want to fill them with embellishment and take the attention away from the pictures, but I want just a little something. So a sequin or enamel dot, a gem, anything like that is a really simple way to just add a tiny little finishing touch. Here's my finished page with a little circular die cut up here and a few of those gold sequins dotted about. I found some washi tape to run in this horizontal space here and then repeated it up here at the top, again emphasizing that wood grain frame. So now I have 3 different wood grains on the page, and if I have 2, sometimes that unsettles me a little bit. It's nice to have 3 different ones. So that tape checks that little box too. Now your challenge this week is to use the 1/3, 2/3 combination to get more pattern paper onto your page and see if you have a pattern that will work where it's actually the A side and the B side of the same piece of paper. But if your favorite combination comes from 2 different sheets of paper, that's absolutely fine. Go ahead and use the 2 different sheets, not a problem. Now once you've started with that background, you can use this sort of design with frames or mats to keep things in a really kind of boxy but different sort of format, or you can use absolutely any composition that you want on top of the 1/3, 2/3 background. You can swap it and have 1/3 at the top, you can have 1/3 over to this side. Obviously then you can do it this way as well. I'll just keep spinning it around. But the idea of 1/3 to 2/3 is a really nice balance, and it will help you bring in the bolder pattern papers without them taking over. So if you want to use anything and any design that you like, so you might have 4x6 photos, you might have photos in a line up here, absolutely any design that you would like to use on top of that 1/3, 2/3 background. Now when you've created your page, share it with us in the gallery, tick the box so that we can see it, and tell us a little bit in the description about how you got on with your 1/3, 2/3 pattern paper challenge. And next week we'll get on with a new challenge. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you soon.
Join us next week for the continuing adventures of Glitter Girl and the ongoing mystery of the scrapbooker behind the mask at twopsinabucket.com.